What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Roots and Streams podcast. I am your host, Matthew Yamas. Um, so yeah, thanks for everybody who caught the last episode. I really didn't, put out that many notifications. Really, no notifications. I just recorded it, threw it back out there after being gone for 3 weeks. So, just want to give a big thanks to people who just jumped on or just found the episode, or they got a notification. It was maybe about 20 plus people that watched or listened. So just mad props to you and many thanks for listening in. And I'm still a little under the weather. I don't know. I can't seem to shake this cough. The cough for me is always the last thing to go. Still got my throat. It may sound a little nasally still. And I may have to take quick pauses to drink water. So just excuse me in advance for that. And so for today's topic, it does have to do with a post that you may or may not have seen that I put out during the week, and it was about a verse in Proverbs, one that, to me at least, it's a little controversial. I know I point it out. I talk to people about it all the time, and it's not even talk to them about it. I just say it, and then we'll chuckle, or just be like, that's interesting. And I feel like oftentimes that happens when we get to uncomfortable verses and scriptures in the Bible that feel uncomfortable for us in the society, the time, the culture that we're living in today. And we read something that's uncomfortable, doesn't quite sit right with us from the Bible. We're like, let's just keep moving. To me, though, those are some of the most interesting verses. And I don't know if this podcast is going to turn into, or at least when it's just me, is going to turn into a Bible study of sorts. I don't mean for it to, but the Bible is just so interesting to me right now. I find it incredibly deep, and just, I was somebody who even in high school I wasn't familiar with it, but love things like Shakespeare, right? And I love when things had so much deep meaning and multiple meanings, and just was a lot to be unlocked. And I feel like the Bible for me right now in my life, and for a while, has been the more I read it, the more I understand it, learn more about it, get more context, learn from people. I was like, whoa, that's there. Oh, that means that. And it just is a lot deeper than what I thought was on the surface. So again, I don't mean for this to be a Bible study of sorts. I'm not trying to push any religion on anyone. This is just, hey, this is a podcast that I'm hosting. I'm talking about some of the things that are interesting to me. And I'm hoping, and that are either just on my mind. And I'm hoping, that some of these things are things that you're all dealing with, or think that are interesting, or never have approached, or afraid to approach things like difficult verses in the Bible, that are a little controversial. And it actually came up again because it's been years that I've been talking about it. So the verse, or I guess verses, let me rattle those off real quick. And so I'm going to be getting some help from my Bible here on my screen, verses and translations. And I have some ChatGPT help over here as well, because I've been going just back and forth, really just trying to get more context, deeper dive into this verse. So, as you may have seen in the post, it was a man. Oh, actually, the first one I'm going to start with here is Proverbs 19. And it is verse 13. So it's a foolish child is a father's ruin. All right. So that's the first part, talking about usually a son or a child. But the second part it's probably even more so controversial, and a quarrelsome wife is like the constant dripping of a leaky roof. Let me see. Where's another translation we have here? Or a contentious wife is like constant dripping, right? Like dripping water. I don't know if you've ever had a leaky faucet, at night or shower and you're trying to sleep and the whole house is quiet and all you hear is the drip, 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 drip. I for sure, it's happened multiple times, to the point where I just like will put a rag, I don't know, a cup, um, sometimes shut off the water. It just, you can't sleep. And so, um, this kind of just giving you a visual right now. I'm not even getting into the depth of it, but just how like that can just be so, right, hit you to the core and just make you so uneasy. Um, and so like this, the common thread that we have here is how these verses are pointing out a quarrelsome, like nagging wife. Let me go to the next one, which is Proverbs 21. So it comes up again in Proverbs 21. Proverbs, and if you're not familiar with Proverbs or the Bible, so the Bible, let me do this really quick. I may have touched on this in the last episode, but I don't remember because I kind of recorded it twice. And you just heard the second one. So Proverbs, so the Bible's broken up into, let me do like really big, like overview. So the Old Testament, which has like the story of the Israelites, the Jewish people, and how like their journey with getting to know God, or God of the universe, Yahweh is another name for him, and taking them out of slavery and just trying to like their relationship with God. This is before Jesus, right? And then the New Testament, if you're at all familiar with the Bible, so that's like post Jesus, Jesus being born, his teachings, and then like teachings about his teachings, which was what Paul writes about. So Proverbs, though, it is in the Old Testament. However, it's a book that's just on, it's just like sayings. Like, I don't know if you ever heard that saying, the proverbial saying. I believe it comes from that. So proverb is just like a wise saying, wise way to live by. I know I mentioned the book last time, and so it's one of the three wisdom books. The other two being Ecclesiastes, and Job. So, but Proverbs definitely is written more so, like here's like a wise saying, a wise way to live. A little bit of context about this book. So Proverbs 21, staying on that same theme, and I'm just going to go for it here. Obviously, this is a hot topic. So better to live on a corner roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. See, another translation says, better to live on the edge of a roof than with a contentious woman in a large house. So in these times, the roofs, majority of the times, weren't like ours today, where they have like shackles and things like that. They were usually flat and a place where you could store things or you spent time outside. It was common to be on the roof, but not to live on the roof and stay outside, because then you're exposing yourself to the elements, right? To like sandstorms and the sun and rain, because the roof was just exposed. So there's that one. And in this same, I believe it's Proverbs 21 as well. If we go further down. So Proverbs 21:19. Better. So this is the one I posted. I posted Proverbs 21:19. Better to live in a desert than with a quarrelsome and nagging wife. All right. I think that is enough verses pointing out, perhaps maybe the way some people take it, is that wives are quarrelsome and wives are nagging, and it's not nice to be around, and you're better off just living outside in the desert or on the roof, because it is like this nagging, annoying faucet that is just going drip, drip, drip. And I say all this, and I start with kind of these verses and this imagery, because so I'd imagine that some of the residue that's from that time. So remember that was probably written thousands of years ago, and we were between like four. I could be wrong. I could totally ask ChatGPT real quick. Let's just ask. Haven't done this. This is the first time I'm doing live ChatGPTing. I'm just trying to take my time with this topic. Um, and if you, let me just take a moment. I know some women do listen to this. Obviously, I have a wife, I have a daughter, um, and I've talked to actually a dear friend of mine and multiple other women about it. But most recently, one dear friend. And I think immediately when you hear something like that, especially if you have negative experiences with religion and the Bible and growing up in the church, you're like, Matt, why are you telling me these things? Like, you're confirming like why I don't like the Bible, why I don't like Christians, and why I don't like trust it. Um, and I just want to take a moment to say like the reason, kind of like spoiler alert, um, I bring this up is because I am under the belief and under the understanding is that the Bible was written for not our culture, not our society. It was one that was definitely, um, well, it was a, what was the term here? It was patriarchal society, right? So when where men were kind of running everything, right? And in this proverb, in this book was written a father to a son, and so the spoiler alert is all I'm getting at before start giving all the context is like I want to challenge the thoughts or the way we may be living based on verses like this, challenge them a bit to maybe give a new perspective, that may be a bit more inviting and let the Bible still be the Bible, but also take the wisdom that is still can transcend time and it can carry into today that these books, I believe, can. And I think even though it's saying like the wife is a nagging one, I believe that the wisdom that's here, and when we kind of study it more, really it's on everybody. It's really the spouse. It's really or a family member, and it's not necessarily. So I just kind of go towards that where I want to end up, because if you find yourself feeling like just triggered, or why does it say the wife and why doesn't it say the husband? I'm gonna get there. That is my goal. I don't want to turn anyone off right away, but kind of want to take a journey a bit. So if you can stick along with me, hopefully it's worth it. But if you need to tune out and it's too much, I understand. Everyone is where they are, and it's fine. So back to what I was going to chat GPT of, like, when was this book written? Good thing I remembered. I almost forgot. So when was Proverbs written? Let's find out. Oh, let me change that. Well, let's see. So 10th century BC. Oh, it's a little bit more recent than I thought. Hang on. I know, I just throw around years and stuff. No, I wasn't too far off. So it's written like about 3,000 years ago. What did I say? 4,000? About 3,000 years ago. So most of them are attributed to King Solomon, which was seen as like the wisest Israelite king, Jewish king, ever. And he was just super wise. And so they're all his wise sayings. So why do I bring this up? Matt, why are you ruffling feathers? I like my Christianity and I've never known this verse and now I got to deal with it. Or, I don't care about Christianity and this just proves things. So hopefully I can just give more context and kind of show what I've been doing lately, especially with verses like this. for one, I'll bring them up from time to time, and I'll do it sometimes in a humorous manner, and sometimes people don't appreciate it, and sometimes they do, and sometimes it makes interesting conversation. So recently, I was at dinner with another couple, and I bring up this verse because it reminded me of when when I'm fighting or having difficulties with my wife, we are very, most often, we give each other the silent treatment. We are more stonewalling. We just won't want to say anything wrong. We know we get too angry and we just kind of give each other space. And I think um, that's kind of where this proverb is coming at, is that instead of right fighting and arguing and with a spouse that is just won't stop and they just want to argue, it's better to remove yourself, at least for the moment, and just take a breather and find some peace that can help you to center yourself, and allows, maybe the other person won't, but at least you can control what you can control, and so you can remove yourself, find peace. It may make the other person upset, and have to talk about that as well. um and And so I think that's kind of like the center of these verses. Um, and so I'm going to tackle a little bit here. So I know it says wife and nagging wife. Um, and I'll jokingly mention this, how these verses say that, um, you know, and so remember that this would be a father writing, you know, writing sayings, writing some wisdom, writing some advice for his son. So just give you a little context. One, written 4,000 years ago. Two, this would be a father giving advice to a son. So we wouldn't say your husband, he wouldn't say your spouse. He's talking to his son, and he's saying, son, it's better to live outside it, or to get away from it, from being with a contentious, when your wife, when they're very contentious and quarrelsome, they want to cause fights, they're just angry. And and also, I don't know if you've ever lived with anyone, like if you're married or not married, just with anyone, and been in a house where you're not getting along. It could be so uncomfortable. Like, I know I've spent multiple days not talking to my wife, and just to pass by each other, to have to get breakfast, or to go to the living room. It's so uncomfortable. And the home, I think today and in that time, it was like a microcosm. It was this it was kind of like the cornerstone, the like center. It was of like their life, their daily life. So if you disrupted the home, and like it's kind of their foundation, it really throws everything else off. And I think that's still true today. If your home is so uncomfortable that you're not even happy being there, it really can just throw you off. It makes you just so uncomfortable. And I'm trying to look for the words to describe like this feeling. Um, but it can make you almost, sick, if you have to just be in this a house where you can't even talk to somebody, or you're just always arguing. So I think one of the core things that this proverb's trying to get at is that, how important it is to keep peace in your home. And I know it, at least on the face, it seems like it's blaming the wife. However, um, uh, if you read through Proverbs, and even in that same one, it talks about how words give life, and how our tongue is powerful, and we can bring peace, from the things that we say. And so this is a father talking to a son, telling him like, hey, what you say really matters. What you say can bring peace to your home. What you say, the things that you're saying and speaking into and affirming or not affirming your wife or your children, it matters. So I know this verse specifically seems like it's just pointing out a wife and is blaming. I think as I learn more, it's just that this is a father talking to a son, in the same that, so he would just say wife, in the same that he's telling him that in his house and just in the way he lives, his words matter, his personality matters. And that so there is a lot of other verses that put the responsibility on the husband. That's all I'm trying to say. So if this is a father to a son, the husband has a lot of responsibility to make sure that there is peace in their home, that they are, if they don't know, when they didn't, grow up a certain way and they grew up maybe in a house that was very confrontational. Well, how are we learning, right? Tools, ways to speak, ways to take a break, ways to learn about our emotions. If we have to do those things to be able to speak into the peaceful home that we need, and to be able to bring more peace and just collaboration is not the word I'm thinking of, but just a better relationship with our wife for our family. There is a lot that is to be said through Proverbs, putting that onus, that responsibility on men, on husbands. um, and, throughout Proverbs, actually, wisdom, if you're familiar or you're not, wisdom is actually personified. So the image that for wisdom through the book of Proverbs is actually a woman. So this is kind of a rare moment, but there's definitely other women in the Bible that have important roles. But this is a pretty big one to say that like wisdom is personified, like the image that you should be getting, the like the character that is used for wisdom is a woman, actually. So I think that also is interesting that, it would say, put kind of the onus, or it seemingly would put the onus on the wife as the nagging one, the quarrelsome one. But it also says that wisdom is a woman, is Lady Wisdom. So that kind of tells me, okay, maybe when I learned that, okay, this is a perspective of a father talking to a son, it's like kind of made me step back a little bit. It's like, wait, that kind of does seem like maybe that's more so what it's about, because it's also then giving the credit for wisdom to be a lady. Well, then I would think make a connection to, well, women have a lot of wisdom, and I don't think it's an accident that they would personify like Lady Wisdom. I have more learning to do in that area. I just thought it was interesting, and kind of pushes back a little bit, maybe to think that the Bible is just saying that women are nagging and want to fight and cause issues. Um, and Yeah, I think it's a universal thing, even though, again, context. I'm probably like the fifth, sixth time I've said this. It's a father talking to a son, but the universal application, the universal meaning, right, is about relationships, and how are we working on our relationships to make sure that we don't prefer to live in the desert or on the roof, because it's like telling it's let me I'm sorry, this cough. But so let me say it this way, because I think it's kind of saying this if we give it more context. And the Bible does this a lot. It doesn't say like everything at once, and sometimes can be really too direct, or at least for the way we're used to reading things, and how we have like a lot of the things that we read and watch come with like all the context around it. The Bible doesn't necessarily, it doesn't do that a lot of times. And we kind of got to go searching and digging a little bit on our own, because it wasn't written for today. So I think another way to think about it is like, if we were to give a little bit more to that verse, another translation might read, be sure that you take care of your relationships. Be sure that you take care of your marriage. Because if you allow your marriage to be so quarrelsome, so filled with fighting and anger and bickering and discomfort, it will get to the point where you no longer want to live at home and you would rather live in the desert. You would rather live on the roof. And I think that probably is a better, gives a little bit more context to the book, not just looking at it through the verse. And it's probably, that would give a more round explanation. And it goes to the spouses. I think both, right, have responsibility for the relationship, because there's two people. And there are other translations. So I know I kind of picked on the ones that sounded the worst. I'll be honest, the majority. So let me give you more context. So my assumption is always that maybe you don't know anything about the Bible. And that's not in any way to say like, whoever's listening, like, I just think you don't know anything of the Bible, and you're like a non-knowing person and you don't know anything. So I'm not trying to belittle anyone. I just want to be sure that people have enough context, because I don't know how many people are really nerding out on the Bible like me these days. So where was I? Before I got myself off track there. Oh man, I lost it. Too bad I can't watch it. And then you don't even see me pause. And then I can just come back and find my train of thought. I know I was reading about relationships, spouses, translations. Found it. Thank you for sticking around and not turning off in a moment where Matt lost his train of thought. So translations. So there's like, I want to say hundreds of translations, because if we're talking all languages, maybe thousands, but even just English translations. So the Bible was written in Hebrew, ancient Hebrew. So not even modern Hebrew today. Like what exists. It's probably similar today, but ancient Hebrew, all right. Ancient Hebrew, 6,000 years ago or so. I won't chat GPT that one. Just leave it as is. It's probably somewhere around there, I think. And so since then, it actually so the first translation is a book actually called the Septuagint. It's just the Bible though, the Bible in Greek. So, rabbit hole, let's go. Cause I just learned this. So it's kind of interesting. So in like later Jewish times, as the people were being spread out and kind of just started living all throughout the area and the world, they started speaking other languages. And like the time of, man, I don't even care, but well, like, I guess I do care about history, but I'm not a big history buff, but I just read it recently. So Alexander the Great, around his time, people mostly spoke Greek. So the Septuagint was written in Greek, or Greek in that time. So it was one of the first translations, because Jewish people were starting to grow up and only speak Greek. They weren't speaking Arabic or Hebrew, or knew how to read Hebrew. So they had to translate it. So that was like the start of translations. Like you may have heard of King James translation, that was translated for King James. And there's tons of other ones, more recent ones, like in the last 5-10 years. And they're still coming out. And I mentioned translations because, again, I picked on ones that were kind of, I guess, old fashioned, if you would say, saying, a nagging wife. Really sounds like it's pointing a finger there. But there's other translations that are made it more modern and just talk about like a contentious spouse. Instead of nagging wife, it'll say, like contentious, or like an angry, or a spouse who just fights all the time. And there's definitely translations that have modernized and made it for a wider audience. Again, it was written for definitely written for a father speaking to a son. But now that so many people are reading the Bible, and it doesn't matter whether what gender it is. Tried to make it more general, so it could speak more at the message of it and not so literal. So that's my spiel on translations there. Uh, what else we got here in the notes? So mention a little bit about me for unresolved issues. One thing that I came across, because this verse has come up a couple of times in my life, and like I think the first time I'm like, that's interesting, and shared it with my wife. Um, I think there was a couple of times, if I'm being honest, where I thought it was true and took it at face value. And I was like, my wife is nagging. My wife is contentious. My wife is quarrelsome. I probably should have started with this, huh? Um, just keep being vulnerable here. Um, and there are things that society, maybe movies, especially like comedy movies, people will crack jokes about it. How like they have this nagging wife, this wife that doesn't let them do things. I have to ask permission to go to places, for my wife because she's just so nagging. And it's still something that exists today. And I think if you take these verses for face value and you just read the literal translations, especially ones that are older, and you nitpick things in the Bible like this, then you start to end up with beliefs and norms and practices, um, and jokes that are just talking about, this nagging. The wives are just nagging and they just always want to fight. And I think I probably, if I have to admit, I probably fell for that. And at times maybe believed it when I would get weak in the fight of um, working on having and understanding how to have a peaceful marriage, and what that looks like and what are the different things I need to learn and help I need to get. But early on, reading that, I probably like, oh, that's pretty good wisdom. That's true, like, and so, but what do you do with that? That doesn't make any sense. Now that I think about it now, like if that's all it says, like, what do you get from that? You're just like getting yeah, that's true. But Proverbs are supposed to, from what I understand, at least in the Bible, a Proverbs, a wise old saying is supposed to not just give you like some kind of universal truth. It's supposed to really give you something that's supposed to help bring some life and give you more life and peace and love into your life. Inject those things into your life. So it's standing alone and taking it for face value. Um, looking back, maybe like, yeah, that's true, and it made me feel like, oh, the Bible has some wisdom. But thinking about it today, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense because where does that leave me? Thanks for telling me that it's not so great to live with a spouse that's always fighting. What do I do now? Right? So I think if you read more of the Proverbs and you take it more of like and take some responsibility and actually take the other things that it says to really like watch your words and be peaceful, um, and to speak good things into others, and how our tongue is very powerful, um, and to be forgiving. I've read Proverbs a couple of times, but I can't really remember everything it says. But there's just really, really peacemaking, um, you know, to love each other in there, along with warnings of when we're not, and we are the ones that are being contentious, and we are the ones that are kind of causing issues or blaming. So looking back of maybe when I first read these things and thought about them, I was probably dealing with some issues with my marriage and wanted, to point the finger. And this is just one of those verses that would just always, when I would read through the Bible or time would pass, it would just always come up again. To the point where I'm like, man, why does the Bible say that? It's so interesting. Um, and it brings me to, uh, if you don't believe me, or you're just like, Matt, I don't agree with you, I'm going to take that verse for face value. See how much peace it gets you in your marriage, right? Just telling your wife, like, oh, the Bible says that you're nagging, so stop nagging because, you're nagging. But wait, the Bible is, if you believe the Bible says everything's true the way it should be, then it's just a foregone fact that your wife is nagging and there's nothing to do about it, which that doesn't make any sense. And I want to, yeah, so for sure, those stereotypes, those negative thoughts that don't do us any good still exist today. And I think even serve into a topic and thing I hear oftentimes is like, toxic relationships or toxic people. And I think when we only think of people like and give that reasoning, oh, it's just because, women are toxic or this person is toxic. And I get it. There's some relationships, some people will feel like there's just nothing you can help them, and they just cause so many problems. And sometimes people, yeah, they don't want to find peace. But I'd argue that oftentimes, I'd say more often than not, vastly more often than not, people who are contentious, right? So when we're just talking about spouses, man or woman, like husband or wife, people are just contentious, and arguing and they seem like they just never want to be happy and they're always nagging. Right? We kind of label them as toxic. I would say that there's always something under that, right? Either they learned how or didn't learn how to deal with their emotions, deal with issues, deal with conflict, or usually there's trauma there as well that needs to be resolved. So for myself, even though I know it's hard to deal with, when I see that, or I do have relationships like that, deep down I know, or it's not that deep. Usually I just have a general just realization that there's pain there, and it's being misdirected at me. Right, this person has pain that's unresolved. So I'll give them some grace, and not judge them, so harshly, because I know, and even though they don't want to, and I shouldn't be the target, and maybe just separate myself from the situation. But I'd say just to have some grace on each other, that we all have a past, maybe some things we're dealing with. Maybe it's directly with that person, with that spouse, or maybe it's something in the past that is just really nagging at you. And it's that issue that is nagging at you and that you really need to make peace with in order to work on your relationship with your spouse. Because if we don't, then we're kind of just giving into, right, these stereotypes and gender roles and things like that. And one thing I want to mention is that, so one thing I love, another thing I love about the Bible, oftentimes when you find something like that talks about, and you want to nitpick a verse like that and talk about like, well, this is how I know who you are because this is what the Bible says. And a lot of times people use the Bible to make power moves, and they use the Bible to control things. And when I noticed that, I'm trying to do better at not judging, but I was just like, hey, okay, I know that's where you are right now with the Bible. I know that's where you are right now with your faith. Because it doesn't make sense. To me, it doesn't make sense, where we use things that are said in the Bible to try to control things today, like just control what people do, what they do with their body, like, and like what's right and what's wrong. And we're just trying to like control culture, control people. And sometimes maybe you have a good reason, there's good, fine reasoning from their Bible, but sometimes people just nitpick and will read like one verse and know that people aren't reading any other part of the Bible, so they're not going to really see anything else. And I bring that up because if you were to only nitpick these verses and say, and and go to the next one, which is, since I have some time, I'm doing pretty good on time, less than an hour. What am I at, 40 minutes? I'll keep it under an hour today. Some of you will be happy about that, some of you won't. And that's fine. So, the next verse I want to get at, kind of really draw some context around here, and hoping that you're just totally like, one, you're probably not even listening if you're like, Matt, doesn't make any sense. I don't like that verse. I'm offended by it. There's no wisdom behind it. I've done my best. I know I'm not a Bible guru, and I'm still very much learning, and that's why I still need ChatGPT and the Bible Project and Tim Mackey, and still very much learning and applying it to my life. And as it makes more sense, and I get more context, and I get deeper meaning, it just speaks so many more truths, and I can see the deeper wisdom and really intelligence behind the writers of these ancient texts. So that was all I'd say to get me over to Ephesians. Now, Ephesians, where is Ephesians in the Bible? Ephesians is in the New Testament, and it is written by Paul. So Paul is a writer post Jesus. So he kind of writes about to the very first Christ followers, the very first Christians, before Christians were even a thing. They were people, majority of people, that were not Jewish, were not Israelites. They didn't do like all the Old Testament things. They were new. They really only knew about Jesus. And so some of them, a good chunk of them, were Israelites as well. And, were Jewish people that now believe in Jesus as well. And so he's writing to the Ephesians, so people that lived in Ephesus, which is today it's Turkey. And I want to say all that because, so Old Testament very much so believed like there are writers and authors, right? God didn't just like use lightning to write into all these manuscripts, and that's what the Old Testament is. But it's very much thought of like the words of God, and I guess all of it kind of is seen that way. But I want to say the New Testament is more of like Jesus is stories, and then you have Paul who's writing kind of how to live out Jesus's stories. Probably way more context than you need. But let me draw my line here. So we're talking about wives. We're talking about marriage. We're talking about how the Bible can say like wives are nagging and we need to get away from them. However, then you have Paul, who is super studied in everything I'm talking about and became a follower of Jesus. And he's just like a super nerd of that time, and somebody who was really, really like memorized the Bible probably. And he's talking to these people who are new followers and giving them some wisdom based on what he understands in his Bible and what God is telling him and what Jesus taught him, on how they're supposed to live out their marriage. And so this is a verse that if you're familiar, you'll be very familiar with this verse. If not, so the Bible says, this is where the submission part comes from. So you maybe heard of, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands. And some people will stop there and be like, well, wives, see, you're supposed to submit to me, and because I'm the man of the house, and the Bible says, wives, submit to your husbands. And then we stop there. But let me read a little further. So wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. Now you're more so like, what? My husband is the head. His body. So Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so we're getting at like a symbol of like a metaphor of it. So now, as the church submits to Christ, so as also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Whoa. There's really some deep studying to do here on even what were the original words here and give some more context. I'm not going to go all the way there because this is not the focus. these verses are not. I just kind of wanted to give a little bit more. Um, so you can definitely just read that and be like, heck no, I'm not submitting to my husband, or just be against it, or the idea of like submitting to your husband. So people would stop there. However, let's keep reading and see where this goes for the husbands, right? Because I just, I just find it so interesting how I've grown up, in the church and have heard that, or heard people talk about that controversy of like women submitting to men. But it's so easy. Just keep reading. So it says, husbands, here we go. Love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does the church, for we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Well, I went too long. That's a whole other topic. How two will become one flesh, leave your father and mother. Let's save that for another day. But if you got anything out of that, I know there's a little bit, there's a lot there to chew on, but there is a lot being asked for as well. So if our wives are being asked to, be sub to the submission, right, to your husbands. Well, husbands, don't expect your wife to submit to you for anything if you're not being like Christ for her. If you are not, Christ died on the cross, right? So he gave up his life, and he was like cleaning their feet, and he called himself the servant. So if you are not willing to be a servant for your wife, then don't expect your wife to submit to you. And oftentimes I see this, right? And let's see. So and even talk about like, he who loves his wife loves himself, right? You can't hate yourself, right? And not take care of your body. You'll die. I guess some people do. But the majority, and it's not really talking about that side of it. So majority of us, the vast majority of us, take care of our body, especially today. We're talking about like all that healthiness and diets and taking care of our body. Well, think about all that time and effort and care that you're giving. You should also take care of your wife that way. And oftentimes I think about, well, let me take a quick second to draw some lines here. So if the Bible's also saying like how women are this negative thing, and right now it's saying how husbands need to, and why I know it starts off with wives submit, but also says how husbands should be sacrificing themselves and putting themselves on the line and taking care of their wives like they like so desperately well, like they would for themselves. And I think about it like this. I think in all of that, what everything is saying in those verses, to me, the wisdom in that is like, who's gonna give first, right? So husband, you're supposed to serve your wife the way that Christ served the church. And like I said, there's stories of Christ washing people's feet, talks about himself as being the servant, coming to heal people, coming to feed people. He came to die for us, right? And even if you're not a believer in this and you're just tuning in just to hear what I have to say, like, I think there's just something wholesome here to think about, like, okay, who's going to give first? All right. So if the husbands were supposed to do all that and then the wives are asking to be submit, well, I think it's just about who's going to give first. We're both being asked to do something. We're both being asked to pretty much serve each other. So really, you need both to happen for it to work in this wholesome, loving, peaceful, we are one, we're becoming one together in our marriage, in our relationship. So it's who's gonna do it first, right? Who's gonna show love? Who's gonna make that sacrifice? And I think that's what the Bible, I think that's what Jesus is calling us to do, is to, who's gonna lay it down? Like, somebody has to give, right? So then the other can do their part. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. But We're being asked to do that, to be able to bring peace and love into something that's super important. And if you don't have kids, but hopefully you just care about the future, because these relationships just echo into the future that's ahead of us, into our children, into our children's children. And yeah, I think that's the majority of what I was getting at today. And I know I took us a long way from that first Proverbs of, talking about wife being like a drippy faucet, and it's better to go live in the desert. And if you still believe that, and if you still, want to just run that, I would say, I've had another thought about that, is like, what it's not saying is go to live on the golf course, go live at the brewery, go live, for me, playing basketball. There was a time where I chose to go and live and playing basketball after work instead of coming home. And so if you just want to live by that wisdom, it is not saying that. It is saying just outside, just in the desert, on the streets. It's not talking about go have fun. It's just talking about being away and exposing yourself to the elements and seeing how it's way worse to be out on your own, lonely, exposed to the elements. How bad it is to have a non-peaceful, just confrontational home. And so it's our responsibility to take some action and to pray and ask for wisdom and read these Proverbs and learn more of how to be peaceful, and to take that first step towards making our house more peaceful, to being the servant, whether you're the submissive wife or you're the servant husband. I don't know if one of them sounds worse to you, I guess, but we're serving each other, but who's going to do it first, right? So we don't have to go and expose ourselves to living in those elements and to live in a peaceful home, because it's that important, right? It's that much worse when it's not that way. So that is all I have for y'all today. Hoping to get a couple of guests on. I'm trying to do a better job at scheduling, calendaring things out. I am currently, kind of the nanny. I'm staying at home right now with my son, who's 7 months, and my wife went back to work. So it's been juggling things, figuring things out. But I'm sticking with it. Second episode done. So thanks for everyone for tuning in, for listening this long, and just sticking with me in my nerding out of the Bible. I know you may not be Christian, or you just may not be practicing or care about the Bible, but hopefully it's just interesting to you. As you can see, I believe that the Bible has a lot of wisdom and a lot of just things to give us that can help us to live a more peaceful and loving life that just keeps us close to these life-giving understandings and wisdom that are just so amazing, that they were written so long ago in a time that was definitely more turbulent, definitely more destructive and chaotic and violent than today. So, taking that into consideration, and that's where, these sayings and these stories are coming from. So yeah, hope this was a good listen. Hope you got something out of it. Should be having on a guest next week and the weeks to come, and we'll dive into some more, so we can all just continue to stay close to things that are just feeding us and helping us to live much more joyful, loving lives. Until next time, everyone, I'll see you later. Peace.